Please, ma'am, take my seat. You shouldn't have to stand. Henley's voice was gentle as she stood on the crowded evening bus, offering her seat to the elderly woman who'd just boarded, trembling slightly as she gripped her cane. The woman's face, weathered with age and loss, softened with surprise. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to." "I insist," Henley smiled, already gathering her worn backpack stuffed with library books. "Really, I'm young. I can stand." The elderly woman, Dorothea, settled into the seat with visible relief, her arthritic hands folding over her cane. "Thank you, dear. You're very kind. Not many people notice anymore." Henley held the overhead rail as the bus lurched forward, swaying with the motion. At 24, she was exhausted. 3 part-time jobs, full-time nursing school, living in a cramped hostel room because it was all she could afford after her parents died in a house fire 2 years ago. Every day was a calculus of survival: which meal to skip, which textbook to borrow instead of buy, which shift to take despite needing sleep. But kindness, she'd learned from her parents, didn't cost anything, and sometimes it was the only wealth that mattered. "Are you a student?" Dorothea asked, noticing the medical terminology textbook visible in Henley's bag. "Nursing school," Henley nodded. "Final year. Just finished a 12-hour shift at the clinic before class." "That's wonderful," Dorothea said warmly. "My late husband was a doctor. He always said nurses were the true healers. They're the ones who see patients as people, not just symptoms." They talked for the next 15 minutes, Dorothea sharing memories of her husband, Henley listening with genuine interest. When Dorothea's stop approached, she reached into her purse. "I want you to have this," she said, pressing a card into Henley's hand. "It's my address. If you ever need anything, a meal, a quiet place to study, just someone to talk to, please come visit. I'm alone most days. My caretaker is lovely, but it's not the same as real conversation." Henley looked at the card, touched. "Thank you, I will." What neither woman mentioned was the man sitting 3 rows back, watching the entire exchange with quiet intensity. Vaughn Ashford was 33, CEO of a pharmaceutical empire, and Dorothea's grandson. He'd been following the bus in his car, worried because his grandmother had insisted on taking public transport despite his protests. He'd boarded discreetly at the previous stop, keeping watch. He'd seen everything: the young woman's immediate kindness, the genuine conversation, the card exchange, and something about Henley's tired smile and selfless gesture had stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. Vaughn had lost his parents in a plane crash when he was 19. Dorothea, already widowed, had raised him, teaching him that wealth meant nothing without character. But somewhere in building his empire, he'd forgotten that lesson. He'd become cold, transactional, measuring people by what they could offer him. Watching this young woman give up her seat after what was clearly an exhausting day reminded him of who he'd once wanted to be. 3 days later, Henley stood outside Dorothea's address, nervous. It was a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, nothing extravagant, just well-maintained and warm. Dorothea answered with delighted surprise. "Oh, you came! I'm so glad." They shared tea and conversation. Henley learned that Dorothea's husband had died 5 years ago, that she'd raised her grandson alone after tragedy struck their family, that loneliness was her constant companion despite the caretaker's presence. "My grandson visits," Dorothea said with gentle sadness, "but he's so busy, so focused on his company. Sometimes I worry he's forgotten how to simply be with people." Over the following weeks, Henley visited regularly, bringing groceries she could barely afford, reading to Dorothea, helping with small tasks. It wasn't obligation, it was genuine affection. Dorothea reminded Henley of her own grandmother, lost in the same fire that took her parents. What Henley didn't know was that Vaughn was watching, not invasively, but carefully. He saw how Henley never accepted money despite Dorothea offering, how she arrived even on days when exhaustion made her steps heavy,
how she listened to his grandmother's stories with the kind of attention that made elderly people feel seen again. One evening, Vaughn finally revealed himself. He arrived while Henley was there, walking through the front door with grocery bags. "Grandmother, I brought—" He stopped, seeing Henley. "Vaughn!" Dorothea beamed. "Perfect timing. This is Henley, the angel I've been telling you about. Henley, this is my grandson." Henley stood, recognizing him instantly from business news articles she'd seen in waiting rooms. Vaughn Ashford, the pharmaceutical CEO known for being brilliant and ruthlessly efficient. "You're the one from the bus," Vaughn said quietly, recognition dawning. "You gave up your seat." Henley blinked. "You were there?" "I was following the bus, worried about her taking public transport." Vaughn set down the groceries, his expression unreadable. "I've heard about your visits, about your kindness." Something in his tone made Henley defensive. "I'm not looking for anything, if that's what you're implying. Your grandmother is lovely. I visit because I want to." "I know," Vaughn said, and the coldness in his demeanor cracked slightly. "That's exactly why I wanted to meet you." Over the following months, Vaughn began visiting more frequently, not to check on Henley's intentions, but because her presence reminded him of what mattered. She talked about nursing school, about her patients at the clinic, about her parents' belief that kindness was the only true currency. "They sound remarkable," Vaughn said one evening as the three of them sat on Dorothea's porch. "They were," Henley said softly. "They died with nothing except debts and an old house, but they were rich in ways that mattered. They taught me how we treat people, especially when no one's watching, defines who we are." Vaughn felt the words land like stones in still water. "I've been watching," he admitted. "That first day on the bus, I saw you give up your seat after what was clearly an exhausting day. You didn't do it for recognition. You did it because it was right." "That's what kindness is," Henley said simply. "It's not a performance. It's a choice we make, even when it costs us something." What Vaughn didn't tell Henley, what he discovered weeks later, was that her parents' house fire had been caused by faulty wiring in a low-income housing development built by a company his pharmaceutical empire had partnered with years ago. The lawsuit had been settled quietly, the victims compensated, but Vaughn had never known the names, never seen the consequences, until now. When he realized the connection, he sat in his office, hands shaking. The young woman who'd shown his grandmother and him the meaning of unconditional kindness had lost everything because of negligence connected to his business empire. He found Henley at the clinic where she worked, pulling her aside with urgent intensity. "I need to tell you something," he said raw. "Your parents, the fire. The housing development was built by a company my corporation partnered with years ago. The lawsuit was settled quietly, but I never knew who was affected, never saw the consequences, until you." Henley stood frozen, processing. Then, quietly, "You didn't cause the fire, but my company's partnership."
"Didn't strike the match," Henley interrupted gently. "Vaughn, I could be angry, I could blame you, but what would that accomplish? My parents taught me that holding on to anger over accidents, even when someone profited, only destroys the person carrying it." She paused, tears in her eyes. "You can't change what happened, but you can honor it. Make sure it never happens again." Vaughn felt something break open in his chest. "How are you this forgiving?" "Because forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened," Henley said. "It's about refusing to let tragedy define your whole life. My parents died, that's real, but I'm still here, and I get to choose who I become in the aftermath." Vaughn made changes. He restructured his company's partnerships, implementing rigorous safety standards. He established a foundation funding housing safety inspections in low-income communities. And he offered Henley a position as director, not out of guilt, but because her perspective was what his company desperately needed. I can't pay you back for what was lost, Vaughn said, but I can try to make sure your parents' legacy, their kindness, their belief in doing right, becomes part of something bigger. Months later, sitting on Dorothea's porch at sunset, the three of them together, Henley turned to Vaughn. "You know what my parents would say about all this?" she asked softly. "What?" "That the seat I gave up that day, I got back something more valuable." She smiled, gesturing to the scene, Dorothea knitting peacefully, Vaughn's hand resting near hers, the foundation's plans spread across the table. "I got a family, purpose, the chance to turn their loss into others' safety." Vaughn met her eyes, flooding of understanding through him. "You didn't just give up a seat that day. You showed me who I'd stopped being, and you gave me the chance to become someone better." Dorothea looked at them both, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "This is what my husband meant," she whispered. "Real wealth isn't what we own. It's who we choose to be when someone needs us. It's the love we give without counting the cost." They sat together as twilight deepened, three souls bound by loss, kindness, and the profound truth that sometimes the smallest gestures, a seat offered, a conversation shared, a choice to forgive, ripple outward in ways that change everything. In a world that often rushes past moments of connection, remember this: kindness is never wasted. That small act of compassion you offer, thinking no one notices, expecting nothing in return, might be the very thing that transforms not just someone else's life, but your own. Choose kindness, especially when you're exhausted, especially when it costs you something. Those are the moments that matter most. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.